Hello, and welcome to Writers Group Therapy.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Roshni. We're writers helping writers with whatever writing ailments you might have.
Whether it's related to your craft or your career, we can help.
Are you ready for your session?
The
The doctors
doctors
are
are
in.
in. On today's session, we have Randee Dawn, an author whose books and stories reflect her work as a journalist covering the music and entertainment industries. Her first novel was a pop culture fantasy titled Tune In Tomorrow, published in 2022, called A Wild Ride and Funny as Hell, as it takes readers into a world of alternate reality TV. Her latest book, The Only Song Worth Singing, comes out in April and looks backstage at the music industry with a supernatural twist. Welcome to the show, Randee.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Great. Yeah, we're happy to have you. It's so interesting because Rashi and I both have journalist backgrounds. I was a journalism major, worked for a campus newspaper. Rashni worked in the industry and all that kind of stuff. She could talk about that more if she wants to. But as a background in journalism, how did you start in journalism in the industry, and then how did that influence you to start writing your novels?
Well, the thing is that I feel like I got into journalism backward because I was writing fiction when I was writing about my stuffed animals as a child. But for some reason, I realized early on that getting paid to write fiction and write books was either never going to happen for me or certainly never going to pay my bills. And I'm like, no, I'm going to have to get a real job. So when my aspirations to be a veterinarian in middle school kind of fell through, for various reasons, I turned to my mom and I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life. I'm in seventh grade. And she said, well,
Oh
what do you
boy.
like to do? I know, this is the ambition of the firstborn. Um, and I said, what am I going to do? And she's like, well, what do you like to do? Well, I like to write. Okay, well, you could be a journalist. And I'm like, what is a journalist? So she explained how this works to me. And I had a middle school that was proposing actually a split year of extracurricular activity. In the first half of the year, you would take journalism. Second half of the year, you'd take guitar. So anyway, that didn't actually fall. That didn't work, and I ended up not writing in journalism until I was in high school. But that kind of set the stage for me to get my name with my writing and see how that worked out. And then I ended up going to college for journalism. I have a degree in broadcast journalism. I did a lot of freelance writing while I was in college. I was also writing fiction at the time, but I was a little too fearful of rejection and criticism. And I just didn't show that fiction to very many people, if anybody. So I ended up with this enormous storage of books and short stories and things that of varying quality that had never been really revised or critiqued by anybody. So to me, even though journalism is not exactly a high paid profession for most people, that was the way to pay the bills so that I could eventually get published as a fiction writer, hopefully, maybe one day. And then many years later, it started to happen because I had evolved. I felt better about my writing. I'd learned a lot more things. And I was able to show my writing into the world. So, the fiction came first, the journalism came second. But I think the two really went together best once I took that classic phrase, write what you know, to heart, because I think most people hear write what you know and they're like, but I'm 22. I don't know anything. Or I know about my tragic childhood. And so you get a lot of books that are about, difficult childhoods, which great. But I didn't feel like I had anything to write that I knew until I'd, done a lot of backstage coverage and really immersed myself in the entertainment industry for many years and had a good grip on at least that world. So then I found a way to meld the two together.
Where were you doing your journalism from? Where are you located, and what types of reporting and writing did you do in that space?
I was in Boston for college, and when I graduated, that's where I had been doing my freelance work. I sort of didn't have the confidence that one might need to go into serious, hard hitting investigative journalism. I sort of thought, I don't know anything. I can't possibly cover actual real news. And that's how I ended up getting into the entertainment industry. because when you're in college, they are very interested. The record companies, the movie industry, the studios, all those places, they want to get college students in to see things because that's how you establish brand with the next generation. So when I was in college, I got sent all sorts of free things. I got to go to a lot of free concerts. I was doing music journalism, and it just felt like a natural way to sort of segue into a career by continuing doing entertainment journalism. So I did music journalism for a very long time, and then it became more TV and film once I got a little older. But I've always stayed in the entertainment industry. And along the years, I've had only really two full time magazine jobs. I wrote for Soap Opera Digest for about 5 years. And then I was at the Hollywood Reporter for about 5 years. And everything else
Oh.
has been freelance. I've written for Variety, Gold Derby, the Today Show website. Um, I've had something in the New York Times. It just kind of goes all over the place. But everything else has been this cobbling together of a freelance career, which I think really suits my temperament better and also gives me a lot more time to do fiction writing when I
Which is, sometimes the day job fuels the
want
passion. So I totally get that.
to. 100%. Yes.
So since you're around, I mean, obviously your fiction and your journalism are going hand in hand, but since you were around so many, like, I'm sure movies and films and TV shows and stuff, how did you take what you were seeing and possibly critiquing and apply that to your own work?
Right. So with Tune In Tomorrow, which is kind of really where I married these things properly for the first time, I came up with the idea of creating a fantasy world where we were asking the question, what would mythical creatures watch on TV and film if they were making their own TV and film? Like they wouldn't make Game of Thrones, right? Because that would be boring. That's like, oh yeah, dragons, so what? Who cares? They would be interested in the mundane things that we lived in. And so that presented a funny platform for me to think, okay, well, what if these mythical creatures made their own reality show? And they had actors who were humans. And the whole idea was this is how humans really live. And it kind of had this soap opera aspect to it. And it would be very boring, mundane things, which often appear on soap operas because it's all much about relationships and embezzlements and small crimes and things like that. So that kind of is how I put those things together for the first time in terms of something I got published. Before, as I mentioned before I started doing television and film, I was doing a lot of music journalism, and that helped me create this first draft for The Only Song Worth Singing, which is really, again, it brings this fantasy element into a modern context. It's called urban fantasy or contemporary fantasy, but it's like when you dispense with knights and quests and castles and basically say, well, what if the mythical creatures or the fairies or whatever were wandering around among us in our modern life? So in this story, I took a rock band who was over touring in the United States for the first time and had these Irish fairies chase them around and make their lives like really difficult. And that was a way for me to talk about what life on the road was like and what the dynamic between band members was like, but also how they might actually combat an eldritch evil at the same time that they're also doing sound check. And it's not meant to be funny. It's not intended to be a funny story. This is a much more straightforward adventure kind of thing. But it was a way for me to explore themes and topics in a way that really excited me based on a lot of the things that I had seen going on backstage or when I had talked to real musicians in real life and just seen how it all went. Because it's my take that what you often see in TV and film when they try to portray the music industry one way or the other, it's so disassociated from the reality of a lot of it, a lot of the real musicians' lives and the industry and all of that. It's so much more mundane in a lot of ways, but it's also it's on a smaller level. Not every musician is a jerk, but you always see them being jerks in TV and film. And I wanted to portray what it was like as, a young 20 something, which I no longer was, but when I started writing The Only Song Worth Singing, I was a young 20 something coming to America for the first time. And the only people are the guys in your band. And you have to stand in front of a whole bunch of strangers and do your art and hope that people like it. And you don't know anybody else to talk to for weeks on end. And everybody else wants a piece of you. And I was really empathetic to what that might feel like in a non hyperbolic, non stereotypical way. So that's what I was trying to do with The Only Song. And then, the fairies show up and everything gets crazy.
I love urban fantasy. I grew up reading a ton of urban fantasy, but it's
Cool.
interesting to hear you talk about it because so you've been working on Only Song for a very long time, it sounds like, right? It's been kind of
Yeah.
kicking around.
Yeah.
So, one of the things they always tell authors is right to market, but trends change. So,
Mhm.
I know right now like cozy is kind of the big thing. I don't know where urban is in the lineup. How do you deal with that? Or do you're just
So,
like I'm writing what I want?
yeah, that's the thing. I think the thing is ultimately a writer has to write what they want. And yes, you can write to market. Yes, you can say, oh, I could take things in this direction or whatever. But I think strictly writing to market is, I hate to say this because I know a lot of people do it, but my husband said to me once, why don't you just write exactly what's selling now? And I said, number one, it takes years for these things to come out most of the time. So if you're writing for what's selling now, it's not going to be, might not be there by the time the book is ready. But secondly, that's kind of hack work. That's really if you say here are the directions of what you need to write, and you say okay, I can write those things. I mean, that's what I kind of do as a journalist these days. I write a lot of listicles. I write a lot of what's the latest Severance fan theories that are out there. I mean, it's fun, it's interesting, but it's hack work. Um, Writing stuff that I actually want to put on the page to me is a little bit more precious in my mind. So when I started writing The Only Song Worth Singing way back in the day, and by way back in the day, I have no idea how old you guys are, but I'm going to guess that I'm probably older than you are. It was the 1990s when I started writing this book. And that's one of the reasons the book takes place in the 1990s. And was not really plugged into the urban fantasy scene that was really getting going around that time. That was sort of the first wave of urban fantasy that was really a big deal. And I wasn't plugged into it. I wasn't ready to show this book to anybody. And the trend kind of came and crested and went away and became old and tired and people didn't talk about it. But I sort of feel like it's been long enough because everything comes in waves that urban fantasy, especially music based urban fantasy, um, is really starting to have a second wind or a renaissance or however you want to characterize it. So the lucky thing is that maybe this book wasn't I wasn't ready and it wasn't ready for the first wave, but it might be ready for the second
Please bring urban fantasy back. Thank you,
wave.
Randy, for leading the charge because it's such a great genre. It really is. So
Doing what I can.
Yeah, you're kind of the Russell from Almost Famous in some ways. I was thinking about because he's the journalist following the band around in the movie.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So you have a lot of behind the scenes look at the industry. I've seen some of your blog articles about the Oscars.
Mhm.
Where do you think the industry is going? There's a lot of changes right now with streaming and the pandemic and AI. And have you been thinking about that a lot? And does it affect your, what you're writing next kind of thing?
I think some of it infiltrates what I'm working on next. I think without getting political, the state of the entire country is working its way into what I'm writing next, and everything else is kind of sitting on the sideline because the issues are so big. I'm not a fan of AI. I think AI is a lot of sound and fury signifying nothing at the moment. And what I see really is this ongoing push pull between people who want to make art and people who want to consume art and people who don't want to have to pay for it. And that includes corporations who just basically want to sell, sell, sell and not actually pay the artists. And it makes me sad that it feels like there are more and more consumers out there who are like, I don't need to pay the artist. I can just get this for free. Somewhere along the way, the consumption of entertainment fractured and splintered so that, for example, we didn't think we needed to watch any more commercials on TV, right? Because for years and years, you'd get cable and you'd pay a cable subscription fee. and then you get no advertisement. You're like, great, this is cool. I don't want to see ads anyway. And yes, it's worth $15 a month for HBO or something. Um, but very slowly things have shifted so that we no longer think about art as something that we can own for ourselves that doesn't come attached to some sort of advertisement. Everybody rents music these days. Everybody rents music, movies, even if you think you own it on your desktop. And I think that's a real shift that is problematic. I grew up when we had I would get old albums from the store and they would say they would have stickers on them saying, home taping is killing music. And then you see later on, oh, we're going to put DRM on stuff so that it's protected, so that it can't be copied. But I also grew up in a generation where we would hold up our tape recorders to the radio speakers just to get a song that we wanted that we couldn't seem to buy somewhere
Yep.
else. I mean,
Did that.
I'm guilty of this too. I've certainly tried to get free music and everything, and now I've gotten older and I have a little extra money, and I do pay for music. I do pay for things because I have a better understanding about where this money is going to. But the way that the corporations have made it so that we think we don't really need, like, you don't need to buy this thing. Like, you'll give us money for it, and you can have it as long as we decide you're allowed to have it. And then if we want to put it back in a vault, we won't be able to have it anymore. I think that's pernicious. And I think that's changed a lot of the way younger generations perceive how they're supposed to enjoy entertainment, which is why things like vinyl is coming back. There are more vinyl stores than ever I see. And in part, it's about fidelity. It sounds better on vinyl. But secondly, you buy an album, you can play that song whenever you want. And no one's ever going to show up and say, we're gonna take that away and put out a new high remastered 50th anniversary version of it, and that old version of yours, you can't play that anymore. So I
Right.
know this is probably
Yeah.
very off topic, but
I mean,
that's
literally, if
kind
you
of
have a vinyl record, you can find a crank, Victrola and play your record.
exactly.
You don't even need electricity.
That's right.
That's kind
Yeah,
of like,
yeah.
yeah, technology proof
In
media.
in the in the post apocalyptic
Right,
world that is
exactly.
is to come, we will still be able to use our Victrolas.
Yeah, I mean, I have shelves of DVDs over here, and I can't remember the last time I played one of them. It's
Yes.
but I keep them just in case.
Hmm. You have it just in case. But here's the thing about that too, and having written in the entertainment industry for a long time, we always think of our DVDs as indestructible, or they're always going to be there. But there's two problems with that. Number one, DVDs do degrade,
Mhm.
and number two, as the technology changes, the DVDs that we own right now might not be playable in 20 years. I mean, they
Right.
tried to make a big deal about Blu-ray, and Blu-ray was going to supplant everything. And
Mhm.
if Blu-ray had supplanted everything, then all of a sudden you wouldn't be able to play those DVDs. But there's a real problem in the film archiving industry these days because so much stuff has been recorded on digital does degrade. And once they upgrade whatever software or hardware that they're using to edit, to preserve, to whatever, some of these old digital copies that exist cannot cannot be played, or they have to go back, they have to find the old equipment to be able to play that. Whereas there's reel to reel celluloid film that, as long as it's preserved at the right temperature from 100 200 years 120 years ago, that you can still play. So we it's a lot like with AI. We sort of see the new shiny technology and we
Mhm.
say, oh, that's going to save us from everything, and it always comes with its own set of problems.
Yeah, and, taking that conversation over to back to your books, in the publishing world,
Hmm.
Roshni's an author, she's self-published, my mom's a self-published author. You started, a long time ago, but you actually have a publisher, right?
Hmm.
How did that transition happen for you, and how do you feel like that industry is dealing with the mass consumption of books through digital means and that kind of thing? The instead of buying a book, you buy a subscription kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a big question.
Mhm.
For me, the transition from the book sitting on my computer and not doing anything to getting published, I knew that I could self-pub, and I was really happy when, something like I think it's Lulu or Amazon came out and they were like, "Hey, just, give us these files and you can publish your book and you can have it out." And I'm like, great. So if nobody likes my stuff, I can totally just make it for me. And that was actually very freeing. And the first thing I ever did was I took some short stories that had been published online. I put them together in an Amazon self pub book. And I was like, look, I have something to show people. Um, but I did want to kind of walk through what was considered to be traditional publishing at least once, try to get the agent, try to get the traditional publishing deal. And I ended up getting not a big four or a big five publishing deal for Tune In Tomorrow, but I got a strong independent publisher out of the UK called Solaris. And they published Tune In Tomorrow. Then I got another small publisher, small independent publisher who's based in Rockville, Maryland, Arc Manor, to do my next two books, Tune In Tomorrow. I mean, sorry, The Only Song Worth Singing and Leave No Trace. So I'm still not like big four, big five published, but I wanted to have somebody who had a business interest in my art to give me the thumbs up and say, yes, we think this is good for the marketplace. And I wanted to do that enough times to get enough readers that if I did, or when I did eventually go and self pub, whatever it is, I might want to still do, then I might have this core of readers who'd already read my stuff and had gotten exposed to it early on. So that was my goal with getting published traditionally. I don't have anything against self-publishing. If you're doing it in a quality way, I think that's great. There's a lot of people who are just throwing stuff onto pieces of paper and getting it quote unquote calling it published. But I think if you're putting a lot of effort into making sure your book looks as good and reads as good and is edited as good as everybody else, self-publishing is a great idea. A friend of mine actually has done that and has done quite well. The publishing industry itself, you know, I think what most people don't grasp when you first decide you want to get into publishing one way or the other is how much luck is involved. There are so many incredibly talented writers out there who may get a publishing deal and may get it with a well-known publisher, and it still goes nowhere because you can go all the way from agent to big five publisher to getting that book out. And if the publisher's marketing department decides, you're not one of the four or five books we're putting out this year that we want to put a lot of money into marketing wise, you're going to sink like a stone. There's so much happenstance and luck and other people making decisions for you about whether or not you can make yourself a success in the industry, that it's really hard to get noticed one way or the other. And I think that's a problem in publishing in general. Um, it's nice that everybody can get published as they want to get published, but I think that it makes it even harder to rise above the noise to get any one particular book, no matter how worthy, noticed. And I'm not really sure how you change that. As you all probably know from talking to people, whenever you say, "Oh, I wrote a book," people don't people's most people's reaction might be, "Oh, congratulations." The second thing they're probably going to say is, "I've always wanted to write a book,"
That
or
is
"I have
so
an
true.
idea for a book. Do you want to write it? You want to write it for me?" And this doesn't happen in other professions. If somebody's a surgeon and they go, "Yeah, I did an open heart surgery this past I always
Yeah.
wanted to do that. Can I cut somebody open?" People think that they can be a writer just because they have been told they have to write things every once in a while. And I wish some of those people would be more readers.
Preach. Everything you're saying is like truth.
you know, People say to me, "Oh, that's so great. I'm glad you wrote a book." I don't think anybody who ever says to me, I don't think I could ever do that. I'm like, "Great. We need you. Please. We need more of you. We need more readers, more people to buy the books."
Oh my gosh, seriously, I am just like, wow, everything you're saying, totally. Been
Yes.
there, experienced it, I totally get what you're saying. It's
Uh-huh.
funny because when I looked at your Amazon page and I knew that you were going through a trad pub for Only Song and then the
Mhm.
sequel Leave No Trace, but I noticed that they were coming out fairly quickly, which is a self pub strategy, right? The rapid release. And I was like, oh, so did you write them at the same time or how did that usually there'd be a longer, you know what I'm saying, like at least a year or so in between each book, but I'm like,
Right.
"Wow, they're coming out so quickly."
Yeah, so both of those books were written before Tune In Tomorrow. They were written decades
"Oh,
before
okay."
Tune In Tomorrow. Like I had the earliest version of Leave No Trace when I was in middle school and writing it during Spanish class. Like it's really not the same thing. There is a basic core character And it's this young woman who, for reasons, has had to grow up in the woods by herself, not by herself, but mostly by herself. That core character came up to me when I was in middle school, and I never let her go. But the story is very, very different than it was when I started. It had no fantasy element, for example, early on. But that book I was writing in middle school, the only song we're singing, the first version I was writing when I was, just in college. So these books sat around for a long time because I didn't know what to do with them and I didn't feel confident enough to show them around. Um, so when Tune In Tomorrow came out, what happened at the same there were two things that happened at the same time. We were waiting to hear back from Solaris to see if they wanted more books in the Tune In Tomorrow universe because I have other ideas. And while we were waiting for them, a friend of mine's girlfriend is an editor at Arc Manor, and I was standing next to her at a convention, and I said, "Hey, I have these two books. Not really sure what to do with them." The only song worth singing had gotten me my agent back in the day, so I felt really confident about the quality of the writing. But I said, we took, the only song got me my agent, but it never got picked up by a publisher. And Leave No Trace went to acquisition at a publishing house, but then they turned it down. And they're just kind of sitting there. And I feel like they're great. And I think they have a lot to say. And here's what they're about. She's like, well, I'll look at them. And then I was on a panel at another convention with the publisher at Arc Manor. And I sort of, got him into a long conversation after that panel and also went over the books. And he said, yeah, we'll look at them. And so they kind of they were never meant to be a package deal exactly, but they kind of traveled in pairs and they both got accepted at the same time. And although nobody else could, like, you can read them totally separately. They really don't have any obvious connection except that both of them have fantasy characters who are from what's called the Green Place. But I have another book in mind that would tie them together in certain ways. So, like, they are paired in my mind now, even though they weren't written to be paired. So, what the publisher decided he would do, he said, I'll take them both. And I figured, oh, great, we'll have one maybe in 2025, one in 2026. Nope, he wants to put them both out in 2025. So since they had all been written and rewritten and edited and developmental edited and looked at for, many years, all of us felt pretty confident that it's not that they didn't need another read, but that we could move these things along pretty quickly. And that seems to be what has happened. So it's kind of amazing. I have those two books, and then Solaris came back and said, actually, we want two more books in the Tune In Tomorrow universe. So there's actually another book in the Tune In Tomorrow universe coming out later this fall. So I have
Wow.
3 books coming out this year, which is insane.
You are a busy person. Yeah, that's great. I wanted to ask, I couldn't let this go. In the only song we're singing,
Mhm.
in the beginning, we start off with the young future musicians in Ireland,
Mhm.
and I felt like I was reading a foreign novel. Like I needed a translator. Irish and this, the how did you decide to use so much of that natural language and make that so like authentic that it's hard to read for someone who doesn't know that? And Roshni can probably talk about this more because her husband's Irish.
Oh, all right. Oh, cool. So I have questions for Rashti in a minute, but yeah. So when I was writing the book, my inspirations were very much in the cultural background of Ireland, and I've taken Irish history classes. I have family from Ireland, and I'm very interested in the way in which their culture and their language was suppressed for so many years and how it has become part of the cultural identity. I mean, it's a real success story that Irish kids are taught it in school now because for so many years it was illegal to do so. Okay. So I felt like working that into the would give these characters a depth and a history that maybe is less familiar to American audiences, but there are so many Irish Americans, maybe it's not as unfamiliar. I wasn't 100% sure. So working in Irish words made a lot of sense to me. I was hoping that as I had written the book, that a lot of this stuff could be figured out in context. But once we heard back from a few folks who were like, I'm not sure I'm getting these words, you should know that we now have a glossary. There will be it's not in the arc that you may have seen. There will be a glossary in the end of the book that will tell you exactly what the
Very
Irish
smart.
words
Good
mean.
idea.
Yes.
Oh, that's hilarious. Because the minute I saw crack, I was like, "Oh, I'm fine. I know what's going on." Because I hear these terms all the time from my husband, but I
Sure.
also understand that, like, yeah, average Joe American was like, "What are you talking about? Crack? That's not good. You shouldn't have that,"
You
so
know, I so there's a fine line between you don't want to talk down to your audience,
Mhm.
right? But also you don't want to talk over their heads. And I'm a reader who, when I see something that I don't understand, or word or phrase or whatever, I will go and look that thing up. And of course, we all have the universe on our phones these days, so it's super easy to just be like, "What does that word mean? I will look that up." And I was assuming that most people would have that joy that I do, to look a thing up every once in a while. But I understand that that's not how everybody is consuming what they read or what they listen to. And I don't want to make it harder for them. So I figure a glossary is the way to go. We've put it in the back with explanations. And my only nervousness with that, I had like 4 or 5 different translators I went to be like, I don't want to screw this up.
I mean, it makes sense. It's like if you had Game of Thrones or something with some, like, fancy mystical made up name. It's the same thing in a way,
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So yeah, so there is a glossary back there now, which again was not in the arc. So I'm very happy we're doing
Yeah.
that, and
Just so our listeners know, you don't need to know Irish to enjoy
no,
this book. It's not that obtuse. It's just interesting how you incorporated that. So
it's more like a spice, right? Like
yeah,
it's a
Yeah.
word or a phrase here and there. And often what I try to do, if somebody uses a sentence in Irish, the next person will either in their head or out loud sort of restate the sentence in English, like, yes, I know exactly what you're saying when you say that, sort of thing.
That's
So
funny.
there's a little bit of that going on too. But if you need extra help, now we have extra help. So that's good.
cool. Well, I'm so excited to see these things come out and see how you do, and obviously want to have you back when you have your other books come out.
Oh yeah, I'd love to come back. You guys are great. I love your questions.
Oh, thank you. So you can be found online at randeedawn.com, and you're at Randee Dawn on Twitter, and we'll put those in our show notes. Anywhere else people should look for you?
Well, I'm on Blue Sky,
Ah,
and
wonderful.
I'm also on. Let's see. I do sometimes do TikTok videos, but not really a whole lot, so that's not a great place. But yeah, Blue Sky. There is an author Randee Dawn Facebook page. My main page will basically point you anywhere you need to go. And the thing, in case anybody is only listening to this and not seeing it, Randy is spelled with 2 E's.
Yes.
So randeedawn.com is the best place to find links to basically anything that I'm doing, including
Wonderful.
social media.
Well, good luck with the book launch, and we'll hopefully have you back. And thanks for being here.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you all so much for having me.
All right, so do check out Randy's books on her website and social media, and follow us at WG Therapy on X, Blue Sky, Facebook, wherever else we are, and writersgrouptherapy.com for all our other episodes. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks.